Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. As noted in the description, if you have checked that out or if you want to go there, there's actually a playlist link in which all the videos I've done about the Julia Royce reports and some just like extra stuff are there as well. One of the things that's really interesting, I think, is that this, I don't know if interesting is the right word. As I've said in previous videos, I don't know if interesting is the right word at all. But the point is that stuff kind of keeps coming out about this. And one of the questions, if you watch those videos, is everybody was kind of wondering when Julia Royce released her reports, the question kind of was, what is Grace Community Church going to do about this? Like, are they going to say anything? Are they going to make a comment? All of that. There is so much information that I'm not going to be able to catch you up on in this video. You're going to need to at least go watch part 1 or part 2 of that series in the playlist. And those are 10, 11 months ago that those were made. So we've almost come full circle in a year talking about this. And so that's why I've included that playlist below, because this article that we're going to be looking at from Christianity Today doesn't really cover it very much. It's very light in the details. It does link to the Royce report, but all in all, you don't have to watch my videos, but you need to watch somebody's videos that did a breakdown of sort of everything before this. This article, however, that Christianity Today put out, is rather interesting in regards to it kind of shows us a little bit of what was happening behind closed doors at Grace Community Church shortly after, apparently, the Royce report came out. Like, we don't know when some of these meetings happened, but we do know some of it. Now, I was trying to figure out a way to go through this video without reading the article like I've seen a few other people do. I don't think that's going to be avoidable, though, because there's some things here that I think are... like, as we work through it, we'll see it. So this is what I'm going to do, right? Let's go to the review screen. What I have up here is a PDF of the article, and I, because of how my brain works, am going to try to go through this, and as we go through it, I'm going to try to mark some of this up that I think is fairly important, right? So the first thing that is incredibly important is and I'm going to probably get his name wrong, but Chao, I'm just going to refer to him as Chao, is that Chao here is the guy that was a elder at Grace Community Church. Now, if you, again, want to read this article at all without any of my commentary, I get it. In fact, I would encourage it. The link is also in the description for this article that you can just go read. The point is, Chao is one of the previous elders at Grace Community Church. In fact, he was the elder that seems to be, as you read through this article, was the one that was kind of asked to look into the Royce report's accusations against Grace Community Church. That seems to be kind of what you're going to see in this article, what we're going to read in this article. That seems to be his job. Now, the short of it, before we get into this article, is that Chao, after looking at the reports, the Royce reports, or at least the court documents about the Gray case between her husband and herself, he came to the conclusion that, like, from a lawyer's perspective, because that's his profession, he wasn't just on staff at Grace Community Church as an elder, but he's professionally a lawyer. By looking at the court documents, he decided that, like, there was no question. Of course, Mr. Gray had done all of these things, and he was in the place he was supposed to be, which was jail. Again, you can look at all of that in previous videos about kind of the timeline and all the things that happened there. So he looks at the reports. He's on, the elder board of Grace Community Church, and he brings up that they should probably rectify this situation. Again, we'll get into all this, but I just want to give you the overview. In so bringing that up, that they should rectify the situation, they should apologize, because he doesn't think, I always get this name wrong, I think it's Eileen Gray. He says that she didn't sin in this instance, and we need to apologize to her and make it right. He's basically told, just forget about it. This is the quote that we'll see here in this article by John MacArthur. He says that John MacArthur said, forget about it. Not only, according to Chao, did he tell him that John MacArthur told him to forget about it, but he was also approached by a fellow elder and then was told that he either needed to walk back his comments about his decision on the whole situation after exploring the Royce report's accusations. But if he didn't walk back his findings or his conclusion on it, he needed to step down as an elder. Now, we'll get to that and how concerning that is as we go through this article. But he then, him and his wife, resigned the next day, not only from him being an elder, but from just membership from the church. And he goes about his life. Now, if you remember last year, I think actually Julia Royce actually did a very short article about him resigning. Nobody knew why. Nobody had a clue why he had done it. He didn't go to the Royce report to kind of tell why he did. It was just sort of speculation. Apparently, though, it wasn't entirely speculation from Grace Community Church's stance, because in this report, again, we'll see it in a minute. I just want to give you the kind of the brief overview before we dig in. The idea here seems to be that people kind of knew why, at least in the area, because he says a number of women came to him telling him similar instances to Eileen Gray's instance. And then as these people came forward, he saw the same sort of situations coming up over and over again. And then he kept writing letters to the elders of Grace Community Church, trying to compel them to see that this was an issue, not only with Eileen Gray's situation, but maybe a deeper issue they needed to deal with. And he kept being told, I guess, no, essentially. The article we'll see at the very end, he ends up writing a letter, kind of like a final, guys, please do something about this, before eventually going to apparently Christianity Today, and this article then coming from that. You get this real sense, and I think you'll see this, but you get this real sense from this article that, I hope I'm saying his name right, Chao, did not, like, in everything in his being, he wanted Grace Community Church to, I think in his words, like, do the right thing, like, just fix the situation. There's a link in this article. If you go to the online version, again, link in the description, there's a link on the online version to a sermon he preached at the Shepherd's Conference last year, when all of the first reports had been coming out about, that Julia Royce put out. I would highly encourage you go listen to that sermon that he preached at Shepherd's Conference. It is 45 minutes long or 48 minutes long, and it is fire. It is amazing. You can tell a lot about his character, about his love for the Lord, about his love for this church, Grace Community Church. I mean, there's a lot in this article that you can tell that he loved or loves John MacArthur. He loved his church. He loves his church, or his previous church, Grace Community Church, and he trusted. You even get like a little glimpse of the inside workings of how the elder board works. Like, even in this sermon that he preaches at Grace Community Church at the Shepherd's Conference, you get a glimpse of how the eldership works together. And then after listening to that sermon, then reading this article, you really get this sense that, like, you can kind of feel how he feels betrayed and heartbroken by how joyful he is in that sermon, corresponding to how everything ended up for him. So I would highly encourage you to go watch that, or to go listen to that sermon. Anyway, that's the overview. So if you needed the quick 8-minute version, if you appreciated that, leave a like. If not, travel with me through the rest of this article, because I think there's a lot here, again, that isn't in the overview, and we get a really good sense of what's going on. And I think in the previous videos that I did, before I get into this, in the previous videos I said that until Grace Community Church kind of like came out with some explanation of what happened, I personally could not kind of recommend them or John MacArthur to other people, because if you go watch the other videos, there's too many questions there that aren't answered, and Grace Community Church doesn't seem to feel any need to answer those questions. Now, I lost some supporters on that. Like, I have a Patreon, right? I lost supporters off of Patreon because of the fact that I said I can't recommend John MacArthur anymore because of this situation. I'm not saying he's a bad dude. I think he's very good. at expositionally preaching through the scripture. I just think maybe, and we'll see this sort of in this article, there's underlying things here that that are very problematic. So let's just look at them. So here's the article. Last year, Hone Chu, and I know I'm probably going to get that wrong, and I am so sorry, concluded Grace Community Church had made a mistake. The elders had publicly disciplined a woman for refusing to take back her husband. As it turned out, the woman's fears proved true, and her husband went to prison for child stuff, and I have an entire number of videos about that entire case, and abuse. The church never retracted its discipline or its apology 20 years later. Okay, so let's keep going. As a lawyer and one of 4 officers on the elder board at Grace Community Church, Chao was asked to study the case, right? This was his job. As an elder, they knew he was a lawyer, and they asked him to study the case. Now, this tells us that, and we're going to see here in a minute, he didn't know anything about it till the Royce report. So this is a clearly Grace Community Church reacting to the Royce report behind closed doors saying, hey, you're a lawyer, you know the legality of this, we need you to look into this, okay? So here's the thing. And I should have said this from the beginning, but let me just say this now. Whether this be Grace Community Church or not, like, we need to look at this from if this is any church in your hometown and this is sort of how the church reacts to it, like, what do we do with that? So that being said, the church clearly knows that this case happened, that the Royce report writes about it, and then they are saying, okay, well, we need to put, elders, look at the case and see if there's anything here that we did wrong, essentially. Seems to be what is sort of being communicated. Now, again, this is all from Cho's. Okay, thank you, KL. You pronounced the name John or Han Hugh. I'm going to get that wrong 1,000 times. Anyway, I'm very bad at names normally, and pronunciation is not my thing. So anyway, here we go. The idea is this. They put him to look at the case. Okay, so that's what he did. He was on the case. He was asked specifically, he says, he was asked to study the case. Then he tried to convince the church's leaders to reconsider and at least privately make it right. He's not even asking them to publicly make an announcement, right? And I talked about this in previous videos. They're a local church. There is nothing biblically that says they have to make a public statement about private things within the church. However, and this is what Cho is saying. He's saying that, look, I just make it privately right. Just do that. So that's what Cho's asking. Just privately do it. He said Pastor John MacArthur told him to forget it. Now, again, there is so much limited information that we have in regards to some of the context of these conversations. And we need to understand that, right? So either the Royce Report, Christianity Today, whatever, we have very limited information. All of this is coming from certain people's perspectives, and we're not getting the other side of the story. But as I said in previous videos, if Grace Community Church doesn't release a statement, which they did release a small statement, which we'll talk about in a minute, but unless they say something about this, this is all we have to go off of. So anyway, according to Cho, John MacArthur told him to forget about even privately making it right. When Cho continued to call the elders to do justice on the women's behalf, he said he was asked to walk back his conclusions or resign. Right? That was his ultimatum. Walk back his conclusions or resign. Now, really quick, I just want to make it clear. This is why I want you to go listen to his 48-minute sermon from the Shepherd's Conference. Because I think some people, when you see this term right here, when you see this whole do justice term, that a lot of times is used as a social justice thing, and automatically you may make assumptions about Cho and what he means by that. But if you go watch or listen to that sermon, you're going to see he's very anti liberal social justice. He makes it very clear in his talk at the Shepherd's Conference. So, I mean, go, if you want to know the man's character, go listen to that sermon. That's going to give you a really good idea about where he stands on things. So anyway, what they told him was either walk back this idea that we need to rectify this situation and that we were wrong in this situation, or resign. So Chao chooses to resign. So it has been 10, I'm sorry, you can't see that part. It has been 10 months since Chao left Grace Community Church, and he has not been able to forget the woman Eileen Gray, who experience was described in detail last March in the Royce Report outlet. And again, I want to make it really clear, okay? Super duper clear. I made my opinions on Julia Royce pretty clear in those videos. The short of it is this. I have a lot of issues with the way Julia Royce seems to approach things, seems to frame things in ways that I don't think are altogether full picture. But regardless, the one thing I do have to respect about her is that she provided the receipts, the links for things, which almost no news organization ever does. Her articles are full of links. Now, again, I think some of them, the way she framed them was wrong, and I think some of them were taken slightly out of context, which is why I wanted to do my deep dive videos, because I think, again, in doing that deep dive, there's some things that were very, very gray in the way she approached them. But anyway, that being said, she did provide links and details to this whole thing. So anyway, though Chao stepped down quietly, and again, nobody knew why he left. We all knew he left. He continued to hear from other women from his former church. They had been doubted, dismissed, and implicitly or explicitly threatened with discipline while seeking refuge from their abusive marriages. Now, here's the thing, and this is the thing I think, we need to make really clear, right? We really need to define this, their abusive marriages. There is some legit abuse that happens. There is some very, I mean, if you look at the Gray's case, there are some things there that are incredibly problematic and should have been addressed. And if you watch those videos, it's been a while since I've rewatched them, but I'm pretty sure I cover that. There's some things that are clearly missed in the counseling session that should have been addressed. But we also have to clarify what abusive marriages means. Are we talking about verbally, physically, other abuses, right? Those are all approached in different ways within counseling sessions, and different authority figures such as police are brought in dependent upon this. Okay. So anyway, even at his new congregation, Chao began to meet visitors with connections to Gray's case, which he saw as signs of God's providence. He said he could not forget it, right? The more he learned, the more people he talked with, the more injustice weighed on his conscience, and the more the more concerned, rather, he grew about this church's biblical counseling around abuse. They'll talk about this a little bit later, so we won't get into it, but this seems to be that. There are some people, by the way, there's a comment right now, I'll just address it, that says that Chao went woke. There's no way you can listen to his sermon at the Shepherd's Conference and be convinced of that. That's just, there's no way you can do that. Listen to the sermon, 48 minutes, great sermon. Anyway, here we go. He could not forget it. As Chao wrote in a 20-page memo to top leaders at Grace Community. I want to just make sure we cover that. You don't write a 20-page memo to top leaders at Grace Community Church if you aren't deeply embedded in the situation, right? So he was asked to look at the case, basically, and he was asked to do that by Grace Community Church leadership. That was what he was asked. He didn't just do it; he was asked to do it in light of and in reaction to the Julia Royce case or the Julia Royce articles. He was asked to do this. So he does do it. He comes to a conclusion that is different than what some people apparently on the elder board wanted the conclusion to be. He says that they should at least privately rectify the situation. He's told, according to Chao, by John MacArthur to forget it. Again, we don't know the context of that conversation, but you take that for whatever it is. And he just couldn't do that. Now, he writes a 20-page memo to them last March, and he says, he's saying about the report, I genuinely believed it would be wrong to do nothing. At the end of the day, I know what I know. I cannot unknow it, and I am in a fact accountable before God for this knowledge. And if you have labored mightily to read this far, you now are accountable before God as well. This isn't a man that is wanting to take down, like to malign, to slander his pastor. You can tell from that sermon that he absolutely loves his church. He loves his pastor. He wants it to be right. If I remember right, he was saved at Grace Community Church. He came up as an elder there. He was discipled there. This was his home church. You don't write a 20-page memo to people about the case you were asked to look at, unless, I'm assuming, there was his evidence for why he felt it was the wrong decision. I would actually like to read that 20-page memo. I think that would be helpful because it probably does have things in there that communicate why he decided the way he did. Anyway, that's how he ended it, apparently, ended the memo. He said that, look, I can't unknow what I now know. And hopefully when you get done reading this, he says, you understand that as well. Anyway, the point is, Grace Community Church, this right here is just all about Grace Community Church, about John MacArthur. This is just a background, basically, for people that don't know anything about it. Here's that link I would encourage you to go look at. If, oh man, I keep marking this up. I'm sorry. This right here, Conscience and Conviction. It's a sermon. It's a live link on Christianity Today's page. It goes right to Grace Community Church's website. You can listen to it. It's fantastic. I can't tell you. It's just great. If it was a video, I'd probably do a sermon review on it, but it's not. It's just audio. So there's that. Anyway, here's what it says. He wanted them to correct, right? He wanted them to correct the mistakes of the past and do better in the future. Instead, it says, he discovered they appeared to be repeating them. Like, here's the thing. Obviously, this is all Chao's words, right? This is all from his perspective. Take that for what it's worth. That's all we're doing here is looking and saying, okay, what do we know from him then? Because the reality is, here's the reality. Forget this is Grace Community Church. This is ABC random community church in your town, right? Just like I said in the previous videos, if you want to go watch them, in the previous videos, I said, like, if you forget about this being Grace Community Church and this being John MacArthur, and you just say, this is Pastor Bob at the local community church, treat it like that. What if you found out that they had disciplined a woman in the church for leaving her husband, but her husband was convicted of a whole lot of terrible things, but they didn't fix that, and they continued to tell you that she was crazy and wrong. Now, again, you would have a little bit more information probably because you're in a local situation there, but it doesn't sound great. And so you would probably try to ask why, right? Find out more information, but the church won't put out any more information. They won't tell you anything. And you're like, well, that's sort of a little shady. If you did it biblically, just state how you did it biblically. Because right now, all we have is, again, the Royce report. And I've already stated, I've got big problems with Julia Royce, but she does provide receipts. And we have Chao's words here, which do give us a glimpse. If he's being honest, and there's no reason we have to believe he's not being honest, we have his words from being in the room while this situation is unfolding live last March, April, May, right? Anyway, he was told to, instead he discovered they kept repeating the past. So he's hearing from other women that went through similar counseling situations. And what he's seeing is similar things happening that seemingly also match up with what happened to Eileen Gray. So anyway, months after raising concerns about the 20-year-old case, Chao discovered another grievous Grace Community Church counseling case in the fall of 2022. Now, it's going to go in, this article goes in a couple times about some people that he met, that he talked to, that had gone through similar situations. The question that comes up, just because I've done so many videos on this silly situation, is like Julia Royce doesn't seem to have like done any other articles about this. Christianity Today apparently talked to 8 other women. Either they didn't want their cases talked about like Eileen did, or Julia Royce for some reason can't legally go after Grace Community Church. Like, I don't know the situation, but the point is, one of the big factors was whenever Julia Royce started reporting is, well, if more people come out, this just proves the point that she's trying to make. And then we had like one other case that came out, but it wasn't directly connected necessarily to John MacArthur. It was a pastor that had been hired at Grace Community Church. And then that's all that was heard about it. There was a little bit of talk about their counseling practices. This article actually mentioned those, but nothing else. And it's just curious to me, like, he talked to 8 people. Christianity Today talked to these 8 women. Julia Royce didn't say anything else about it. It's just sort of just an odd inconsistency as far as reporting goes. But nevertheless, for this story, Christianity Today spoke to 8 women, they said, that recounted how they and others at Grace Community Church had been counseled to avoid reporting their husbands and fathers to authorities, to accept their apologies, and continue to submit to them. Now, here's a couple things we want to look at that I think Grace Community Church could just really clear up really fast, or just in general, other churches could learn from. But this idea of being counseled to avoid reporting husbands and fathers to authorities, to accept apologies and continue to submit to them. There's a couple things here. The first one is, if there is something happening within the home that is making someone legitimately fearful, the idea is that there is a matter by which the church assists in making sure people are safe. This avoid reporting is like really strange that this would even be something that would be recommended. You don't avoid reporting abuse or things like that. And you don't encourage people not to report those things. I thought every pastor knew that, but maybe not. So just to clarify that. The second thing is, this accept apologies is very ambiguous in regards to, there are genuinely people that are sorry and do apologize, and those apologies do need to be accepted. But again, that's circumstantial. Like, that is a case-by-case basis. And secondly, what you're going to find, and I think the big thing here, and this report slightly touches on it, is this whole submit thing. We're at a time and place in society where people hate that. They hate complementarianism. You see a little bit of a sort of a big pointy finger at complementarianism in this article. The point being, though, you don't blame complementarianism when people are doing something, but call it complementarianism. But anyway, we'll see if we get any further in there. The point is this: the victims were regularly quoted scripture on forgiveness, trust, love, and submission, and were told to reconcile and return home, even in cases where they feared for their safety and their children's safety. So obviously, there is a point in which you should reconcile and return home. Again, this goes back to, we need to define what abuse means in these situations. You can't just cast a wide net and call everything abuse, which I'm not saying is necessarily happening these 8 women they interviewed. I'm just saying that does typically happen. There are cases, and I know many pastors that deal with cases in which either the man or the woman are saying abuse is happening to them, where it's not abuse in the situation where you shouldn't reconcile and return home. You should reconcile and return home in some of these situations, and defining abuse is incredibly important in those situations. This idea, though, even in cases, that's the concerning part, where there is a legitimate fear of safety and even your children's safety. That's different. Moving on, though. No one from GCC responded to the request of Christianity Today. Here's the thing. I don't disagree with that. As I've said before, a local church is not biblically required to give a response necessarily to a news organization or a reporter or anything. I think that it would be wise, as I've already said in previous videos, to post some sort of or put out some sort of statement of, these are our practices, this is why we follow them, this is how we handle situations like this, in cases in which it's making a way bigger splash than, I mean, it's causing enough questions that you should at least say, well, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is why we do it. Instead of just responding in, well, we'll look at their response here in a minute. So anyway, they decided to not respond to their counseling philosophy or respond to the abuse or to the questions about specific cases. 6 pastors and elders were contacted for comment by phone or by email repeatedly over a 3-week period prior to this article's publication, as well as one former pastor and elder update. Apparently here, they did post a statement, right? Now, I don't think this is a clickable link, so it's not. So we can't view it. But the point is, they do say here, they say that the statement says that the elders do not comment on counseling or discipline disputes, but the church deals with accusations personally and privately. They defended their counseling, saying it's biblical, So here we go. So further in the article, Chao first read about Ellen Gray's case last March. So he knew nothing about it before the Reuters report covered it. He was then asked to look over the church's handling of the case. Again, we've already stated this. This is not Chao looking to, reading the article and then going, I need to take down my church. I need to, do this or that or the other. It's him being asked to look at the case. He was a lawyer. They knew he was a lawyer, and he had been asked to look over the church's handling of the case by the elder board. That's what he was asked to do. So this idea that he's trying to be vindictive or whatever is just, he was asked to look at it, according to him. His review, drawing from his legal background and training, became part of the initial internal investigation. Everybody wondered if anything was happening. What were they doing with it? Were they talking about it? What was their approach to it? They launched, apparently, an internal investigation, went over intelligently to the lawyers that they had in the church and said, hey, could you look over this for us? We just want to make sure it got handled correctly. Right decision, right? If all this comes out, everybody's asking questions. Hey, look over this. You guys are the ones that deal with the lawyer stuff all the time. Tell me, did we do this right? The church discipline happened in 2002, a few years before Chao came to faith at Grace Community Church. So yeah, he came to faith there. I can't even, this is a separate thing. And some of you maybe that watch this video have gone through it, but you've attended a church, you've been saved at that church, and then something happens at that church and you have to leave that church. Unless you've been through that, I've been through a similar situation, not to that quite extent, but I know people that I'm very close to that have went through that exact situation. And I can tell you right now, that is not you don't do that lightly. That leaves scars for decades on somebody. Especially, they don't want to leave, but they're compelled to because what they see happening. Chao, again, I don't know the dude. I've listened to a 48-minute sermon, and I have some quotes here from him. But from that sermon, I can tell you right now, he loved his church. He loved his church. He loved his pastor. He wanted to do the right thing. This is the feel I get. You determine your own, but go listen to that sermon. He got saved at that church. He was asked to look into the Gray case, and he did. Gray had refused to follow leaders' counseling to lift restraining order against her abusive husband, David Gray. During the month's communion service, MacArthur characterized her decision as unrepentant sin, saying that the mother of 3 chose to leave and forsake her husband. If you want to know my opinion on that, I've covered it in other videos. This video is going to be long enough as it is. I'm not going to get into it again. David Gray tells a little bit about him, about the case. Okay, here we go. Chao said many leaders at Grace Community Church refused to read the Reuters Report article. Again, the best sort of what did they do when this came out situation that we can get is from somebody that was apparently in the room. We know he was an elder at the church. We know because of being an elder, you'd be in those meetings. He's saying, and again, as I've already said, we have no reason to think he's lying. He said they just refused to read it. Some of them did and dismissed the findings anyway. Top leaders at the church became defensive and said and wanted to protect MacArthur. I want to talk about that part. Let's talk about dismissing the findings anyway and wanting to protect MacArthur. Here's the reality of church dynamics. Whenever you are at a church and you've gone there for a long time, you have faithfully attended, volunteered, been mentored and discipled by people in that church. There are pastors that you will know that you love. And when something happens that somebody says something about them, you do get super defensive because you have a perception of them and you want to protect them. You want to defend them. You don't want anybody to say anything bad about them. And what happens here is that seems to be what's going on with MacArthur. Hold on real quick. What happens here is that they read the report, they don't believe the report, and they decide that they're just going to not address it, apparently. They want to protect MacArthur. Now, you can believe this or you can dismiss it. It's up to you. The point is that this is a believable reaction for people that are close to their pastor. You've probably done it to your pastor. You've probably done the exact thing with your church, in which you've said, like, no, my church wouldn't do that. And somebody, right or wrong, right? I mean, it can come from a genuine place, but the point is people do defend their leaders, sometimes from a good place, and sometimes just from a place of they love them and they can't believe that they could do anything wrong. That being said, that's a believable scenario. To show, as well as the seven Christian lawyers who reviewed the material, it was obvious that David Gray was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and Eileen Gray's refusal to lift the restraining order to protect her children and was objectively reasonable and fully vindicated. Here's the thing. In the previous videos, I think I've stated that I don't know the law, right? I'm not a lawyer. It's not like I can look at legal documents and determine things. It is interesting that you have lawyers. Again, I mean, I don't know if they necessarily need to be Christian lawyers, but it makes sense that they would have the lenses of the gospel as they looked at these things. But the point is, you have 7 people that look at this and determine that, yeah, what David Gray did was deserving of this. There's enough evidence here to say he did do it. I know you might be like, oh, they're all wrong. Maybe, but you normally can't get 7 people to agree on anything. And you have 7 lawyers looking at these documents saying that, yeah, he definitely did it based on the evidence that they see. Anyway, moving on. Now that the facts are indeed known, it is not too late to do justice, even at this late stage. This is what he's telling them, apparently part of this 20-page memo. This seems to be, he wrote to the elder board. So this seems to be part of this 20-page memo. He's saying we can still do something about it. He said one's own integrity and the upholding of justice and righteousness and being faithful even in the small things, even for something 20 years ago, matters a lot. Chao seems like a pretty legit dude, honestly, just from the snippets we're getting. Again, I know news articles can paint people in certain lights and project certain stories. I get it. Take this with a grain of salt. But, So anyway, Chao expected the church to hold itself to a higher standard than even the secular courts. That would make sense. That makes total sense. Why would we not do that? Anyway, let's keep going. You can read this whole article. It's 23 pages. We're not going to get through the whole thing. But while still on the board last March, Chao emphasized the urgency to correct the record. The elders had called out sin where there was none, he insisted, and if they learned that they had disciplined a man wrongly accused of adultery, wouldn't they make that right even if they found out 20 years later? This is a curious statement, to be honest with you. I don't understand why it's quite worded that way. He seems to be making a dichotomy. He seems to be saying, hey, if this was a guy, we'd fix it, right? Now, according to Chao, who was the board secretary responsible for taking notes. MacArthur replied during that meeting that the comparison did not apply. There does seem to be, at least in this framing, this idea that we handle the accusations of men and women differently. That's the framing. I don't know if that's the case, but that is curious wording to use if you're making the case that we approached the Gray situation incorrectly. And if it had been flopped, we would apologize to David Gray if Ellen had did what he did. But since it was the other way, we're not doing that. That seems to be his assumption. MacArthur said comparison didn't apply. And then there's something according to Chao, MacArthur brings up the bizarre behavior, quote unquote, that like, if you read the Roy's report, the counselors that did David and Eileen's counseling said that she had bizarre behavior. There's a whole thing behind that. You'll have to go either read Royce's report or you can watch mine or other people's videos that talked about it. Anyway, this is the concerning part. After that, Chao said he was told by board chair Chris Hamilton that he would need to either, quote, walk back his findings about the church's mistakes if he wanted to remain an elder. Chao and his wife resigned their membership the next day. I mean, that's a boss move, to be honest with you. Because he's saying, look, you need to say that you didn't find the things that you felt you found. And if you don't do that, you need to get off the board. Which is like, again, I know I keep bringing up this sermon. Go listen to the sermon that he gave at Shepherd's Conference. Because the picture you get of the elder board from that sermon is one that doesn't act this way. Which I'm just making assumptions here from this article and that sermon. But that seems to be at least the primary reason why he resigned membership the next day. He goes, that's not how we do things. In the sermon, he talks about how the board really contemplates things, sits with things, has good discussions about the things that they do and why they do them. He talks about it in that sermon. So this idea that, hey, you need to walk this back or resign is completely a different sort of take on this eldership board than what Chao gives during that sermon. Anyway, there's that. There are a few more examples here of some abuse. You can go read about that. There's some talk here about the results of some of that counseling that happened. Again, you can read about that. I just want to kind of cover some of the high points here. I'm sorry, there's some more here, but I kind of want to skip over some of it that you can just read for time's sake. Here's one of the things here, and I don't know a ton about it. Where's it at? So we did a short video on Bill Shannon. So multiple women named Bill Shannon, the pastor of counseling and ABC fellow, as discouraging them from reporting abuse to police and directing them to stay in homes where they had been threatened with violence. One couple said they observed a counseling session where Shannon failed to advise a member of their family to report a man who had confessed to an incident of horrible things. He also did not direct her to leave him since he had not been convicted. This is a weird thing here, really quick. So apparently Shannon, according to these people, failed to advise members of their family to report a man who had confessed about terrible things, but said that you should not leave him because he hadn't been convicted yet. So how is he supposed to be convicted of terrible things if you don't report him for terrible things? It doesn't make sense at all. Also, and I'll be frank about this, I know nothing about ACBC counseling. From what I understand, it's terrible, but I don't know. That's just what I've heard, so I could be totally wrong about that. Anyway, let's see if we can get to the bottom here. There's something very interesting here at the bottom. I'm sorry. Here we go. this is talking about discipleship or discipline, and we'll kind of end on this. So MacArthur considers church discipline a distinctive at Grace Community Church, where elders follow guidelines that are taken from Matthew 18, first confronting the accused privately and then another witness before publicly announcing cases of discipline that made it to the third stage of the process, when unrepentance would preclude a member from participating in the Lord's Supper. Howe, a former elder, said that at this stage, elders must unanimously approve cases to go before the church body a few times a year during monthly communion services. So the women who spoke to CT about their counseling experience have been members of Grace Community Church for years, some over a decade, and had sat in the service where MacArthur announced the church discipline. They believe that if leaders didn't see their situation as grounds for divorce, their names could be read. So here's the thing, and I think this, I'm not going to pretend to know, and because I haven't listened or read anything about MacArthur's idea of discipline. But biblically, church discipline is to be restorative. Now, again, Matthew 18, this idea, it does get to a point where someone is unrepentant and they are cut off from the Lord's Supper. They're not part of the body of believers anymore. They're cut off from the church. This goes all the way back to the early church, where communion was only for baptized believers. You could not take communion unless you were a baptized believer, and being cut off from the Lord's Supper was a big deal. And this is sort of the continuation of that idea, that if you're an unrepentant sinner, you are not allowed to you are not allowed to partake in the Lord's Supper with everyone that is a repentant sinner. So this idea of as discipline being a distinctive isn't necessarily bad. To be frank, that is a link. I did not watch the link that is linked there with him talking about that today. So that probably describes what he means by that. But just to be clear, discipline in church isn't bad. It's meant specifically for the person to come back to the Lord and to repent for their sins. So that's not a bad thing to do. It just, again, we have to define what we mean by church discipline. Okay. And then we'll end with this. Until now, Chao had not publicly spoken about the circumstances that led him to leave GCC and his advocacy efforts since. He hoped that Grace Community Church would look back at Eileen Gray's case and reconsider the evidence that vindicated her. He repeated pleas to take seriously the concerns about Shannon and the church's counseling. After leaving, he kept contact with top leaders of Grace, asking questions and offering to discuss his concerns privately. He has even emailed MacArthur and Grace to You, exclusive director Phil Johnson, an influential leader and elder at the church. He went back and forth messaging with Carrie Hardy, the pastor who oversees the Grace discipline case and now serves at a church in North Carolina. His appeals drew from scripture, sometimes quoting more than 20 verses on reconciliation, wrongdoing, and justice, such as James 4:17. Whenever he met with or saw elders in person, the case came up in discussion. He texted and called individual members of the elders board to share his concerns. Howe never imagined himself being in the position for advocating from outside Grace Community Church. Over almost 17 years of membership there, Howe met his wife, began teaching the word, and rose to leadership in the church and the board of elders. Here's the thing. Take this article for what you will. But what it really demonstrates here is that the church did react to Julia Royce's report on Eileen Gray. They reacted in a way that they got lawyers together from inside the church, Howe being one of them, being an elder and a lawyer. They said, look at this and tell us if we did anything wrong. 7 Christian lawyers. I don't know if those were the first people he looked at, or these are just people that have also looked at it, but at least Howe looked at the case as he was asked to, and he came to the conclusion that they needed to make it right because they had made the wrong decision. He was then asked, according to him, to walk back that decision that he made from his legal background and from a Christian perspective, or resign. He was then left with no other choice but to resign, because he wasn't going to walk back. Apparently, he was not going to walk back his kind of what he found by looking at this. So the question then becomes, like, what do you do with this then? Like, you, from at least Chao's perspective, MacArthur just completely said, we're not looking at it again. We're not even considering it again. The conversations he's had with elders at Grace Community Church apparently have garnered no results. And the statement, which you can look up on the site, basically it's exactly how they kind of updated their article. The church basically says, we're not going to talk about it. Again, they're not required to talk about it, but it doesn't look good. You have somebody that was in the room that says, like, we messed up on this and we need to do something about it. And you have apparently a majority of the people in that room saying, look, you either need to change your mind about this or you need to resign. That right there, from my pastoral perspective, is incredibly problematic. Because if it did happen, and again, we have no reason to doubt that it didn't, you're telling somebody, change your mind or leave, because we don't agree with your decision and we're not going to do anything about it. The previous videos, if you go watch them, if you care to watch them, at the end I said this: I cannot recommend John MacArthur or Grace Community Church to anybody, because the way some of this was handled, it seemed at the time, 10 months ago, was problematic at best. And over again, I said, like, I want Grace Community Church just to say something about it, just to say, like this is why we did what we did. This is why we kept defending David Gray even though he was in prison. This is why we haven't said anything about the other cases that Royce has come up with. And as I've already said, and as I've said in previous videos, I think Julia Royce didn't do a great job at framing some of the things, but she did provide the facts. And so my conclusion is basically the same now as it was then, only a little bit stronger, in the sense that you have an elder at a church that said, like, I looked at it. I was asked to look at it. The conclusion I came to is that we messed up and we should at least privately make this right. And the church says, no, we're not going to do that. You take that for what it is. But that seems to me, at least from a biblical perspective, from a perspective of somebody, like, if you obviously wanted them to look at this. So you either wanted them to look at it to vindicate you, or you wanted them to look at it for an honest opinion. Did I do something wrong? Right? We all ask people that question. Like, if you do something and you start questioning it, you either ask somebody a question because you want them to have your back. You want them to vindicate you and make you feel better about it. Or you ask somebody genuinely out of a place of humbleness, like, let me know, like, if I messed up. Because I know, like, from my perspective, I don't think I did, but somebody else's eyes on this is going to be kind of helpful for me. One is coming from a place of arrogance that says, I want you to have my back. The other is coming from a place of somebody saying, like, I want to know if I messed up. And at least the way it's presented here, that's all we got to go on. Because again, Grace Community Church is not going to say anything, and they don't have to say anything. But what we're looking at here is basically, at least from Chao's perspective, a case in which Grace Community Church brought him in, said, look at this, I guess assumed that he would agree with them, the other elders. But when he doesn't, he's asked to either walk back his decision or resign. And out of conscience, he resigns. Because he thought they were looking, or he seems to think that they were looking for, like, an honest opinion about how we handle this and go forward. But what he got, apparently, was them wanting to back him, wanting him to back them in their decision, and him going, that's not what I saw. This actually makes GCC look worse. Now, all transparency, Christianity Today, from what I've seen from them, not a huge fan of how they approach things. Are they definitely coming at this from an angle? Probably. Did Julia Royce come at this from an angle? I think she did. all in all, I don't think that Julia or Christianity Today are coming at this from an unbiased opinion. However, if these are the facts, there is an issue. And I'm still at the point where, like, not only can I not in good conscience recommend John MacArthur, but this seems to be an issue where even when a legitimate situation is brought up, he says, no, forget about it. Now, again, I don't know the context of that conversation. But if Grace Community Church isn't going to say, like, this is what we did, why we did it, and how it biblically is correct, it's whatever. Now, this whole thing, again, just my opinion. I don't go to Grace Community Church. I have no affiliation with Grace Community Church. This is just some dude from the outside looking in, going, if this was random church down the street, I would have an issue with this. So just because it's not random church down the street with Bob, pastor, whatever, and it happens to be John MacArthur at Grace Community Church, I shouldn't treat this differently just because it's a pastor that I've looked up and respected for a long time. I need to look at this as objectively as possible. And if this was the exact same scenario with Bob, whatever, down the street at ABC Community Church, I would have an issue with this. And I wouldn't recommend anybody go there. And because of that, like, I have the same thing. You can hate it. You can dislike the video. You can unsubscribe. I don't care, bros. I don't care. If this was a church down the street, I would have an issue with it. And I have an issue with this. Because what it seems to be, at least the way it's painted, and again, they definitely probably have an angle, but if this is right, if this is exactly what happened, this seems like it's way more arrogance than it is humility. That's my take, though. What's yours? Let me know in the comments below. Again, that playlist is down in the description below. This article that you can fully read and the links below are down below as well. Let me know if you like it. Like the video. If you hate it, go ahead and hate it. Whatever you do, I just want your feedback because I like the conversation. And I'll talk to you next time.